Beautiful. Okay. All right. So thank you so much, everybody. Like I said, for joining us this month. We are going to do our typical overview that talks about, some of the general differences between K-12, high school, and post-secondary ed when it comes to accessing accommodations. But we're also going to spend a lot of time this evening talking about some of the common offices and resources that could be on college campuses. These are kind of those just additional resources that are available to all students or to qualifying students. They may have different names under what they go through, but we have some examples from a few Idaho schools, so you can see that there are resources to support students academically, mentally, socially, emotionally, outside of what accommodations can do in post-secondary. So to introduce myself, my name is Julia Gorman. I am the Assistant Director of the Educational Access Center here at Boise State. I work a lot with our faculty and staff to discuss, accessible learning, how to implement student accommodations. I also work with students to get their accommodations, and I work a lot with our autistic students. I will let Erin introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Erin Sutton. I'm the Assistant Director of CEDAR at the University of Idaho. And I do a lot of similar things that Julia does at Boise, doing the bulk of our intakes and interactive process with students. We just got a new access consultant, so I'm really excited about that too. So we've been doing some training of that as well. I'm starting to work with our Raven Scholars, who are our students on the spectrum. And I'm starting a peer social group with them and just doing community and campus outreach. And I'll hand it over to Jamie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Wiggins, and I am the Graduate Assistant with the Educational Access Center at Boise State University. I'm also an academic coach with Trio ACES at Boise State University. So just working one-on-one with students, going over skill development, whatever skill development they want to work on, whether it's time management, study skills, really anything that they are wanting, or just check-in meetings, someone to really talk to just for support. And then I do work with Julia as well with our autistic students as well. So
Jamie. I also know for the first time, I'm really excited. We have some of our colleagues from some of the other Idaho schools that are joining us this evening. So any of our friends from our other schools, if you want to introduce yourself, feel free to unmute and say hi.
Hi there, my name is Scott Lindquist, and I'm the coordinator of the College of Southern Idaho Student Accessibility Services Office. So I do what Julia and Erin does as far as working with students to put in their accommodations and work through the interactive process. And thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm Dan Bruderer. I am the equivalent to all of you at the College of Eastern Idaho in Idaho Falls. Thanks for having us today.
Thanks, Dan.
I'll hop on and go real quick. My name is Dawn Lesburn, so I'm the Director for Accessibility Services, E-Learning, and the Testing Center here at Lewis Clark State College. And I work with Autumn Green, who is our coordinator. I believe she is on as well.
Thanks for that, Dawn. Just like Dawn mentioned, I'm Autumn Green. I am the accessibility coordinator at Lewis Clark State College.
Just to be able to hear it.
In Lewiston.
Thank you so much, Autumn. So excited to have you all join us. I'll let Jamie talk more about our disability centers, resource centers.
Yes, so Educational Access Center, that is at Boise State University. And then the Center for Disability Access and Resources, that is at the University of Idaho. These are our disability resource centers where we do accommodations for students, as well as working one-on-one and to support our students in whatever they need. The EEC and CEDAR provide academic accommodations for students who may have temporary or permanent disabilities. Accommodations, just a brief little definition or just a keynote to know is that they do reduce and or remove barriers to a student's academic experience. They don't always take away something completely, like an exam. For some students, they would never take away an exam that is part of the learning requirements. Then also disabilities include but are not limited to learning disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health related needs, and others. And then almost all trade schools, community colleges, and four-year universities have someone or an office to provide students with disability accommodations. And then a good rule of thumb, if the school accepts FAFSA or federal funding, if they're FAFSA eligible, then they have to provide accommodations to those students.
Thanks, Jamie. So when we really look at this difference, we're looking at how are students supported in K-12, high school, in those transition programs, and how can they be supported in post-secondary education. So the laws are a little bit different. K-12 operates on IDEA, we operate on ADA. And so we really focus on accessibility. In K-12, students have 504 plans, which typically include just accommodations, and then or IEPs, where they have their accommodations, their individualized goals, some pretty heavy diagnostic assessments, some progress monitoring going on. Erin and I both came from the K-12 system as special education teachers, so we know a lot of the stuff that goes into there. In post-secondary, we really look at accommodation letters. So looking at some of that diagnostic information that you do provide in those IEPs, we determine accommodations with the student of what's appropriate, and then we send accommodation letters out to their professors. The purpose of these letters, unlike K-12 where it guarantees success, the purpose of accommodations in post-secondary is really to ensure that equitable access through those reasonable accommodations. So specialized instruction is not included. Behavioral accommodations such as check for understanding, make sure students on task, typically would not be reasonable. We're really looking at what are the materials in the course? What are the environmental factors of the testing center? And how can we reduce or remove those barriers, typically in the environment with the materials, to ensure that equitable access. In K-12, a lot of the time, schools are identifying students who may need that individualized educational support, whereas in post-secondary, students have to come to us. We are not notified if students with an IEP or a 504 or a student who goes to counseling is coming to our university. So the student has to identify themselves as needing accommodations, and that is through the school's Disability Services Center. If the student needs any updated testing, they think, oh, I might have ADHD along with my anxiety, it is up to the student to obtain that new testing or that updated testing. Disability Services Centers do not offer testing to students. A big shift in expectations and involvement in high school and K-12, I know we love our parent support, right? We want families to be involved. Parents need to attend the IEP meetings, the 504 meetings, and parents and families are really heavy decision makers in the process. In post-secondary, we really look towards the student. Parents and families only have access to what the student allows them to. Now, depending on how the Disability Services Center operates, I know at the Educational Access Center, if the student allows the parent to join in for their initial meeting, then we allow them to if the student does. I know some areas in other states, I've heard of disability resource centers that say, nope, only the student comes. And so that's a good question to ask the Disability Resource Center of, is it just the student that comes to the intake? Can the family come? But we're really looking for the student to be able to share their experience, what barriers they might experience in their environment, in the classroom, and about those accommodations that would be able to help them. Again, in K-12, it's very team heavy, right? Especially if students are coming with an IEP. We know that IEP teams are, 4 to 7 team members deep. In post-secondary, decisions are made by the student and their access coordinator. And so we don't have a team of psychologists, of families, of professors that are in on this meeting. It is truly the access coordinator, the student, determining what's appropriate for their classes. And if you have questions throughout, I forgot to say this, feel free to put them in the chat. And we're also gonna have time at the end. Erin, go ahead.
I just want to add something to that last slide that you had, Julia.
Yes.
So through that interactive process and making those decisions with the student and the access consultant or coordinator, we also look, we rely heavily on what the student is saying and our process with them, but also we do look to the documentation and what has worked for them before, and possibly some recommendations that were given from, new assessment data or something like that as well. So it's like different pieces that we pull together to kind of give us that full picture of how the student can be most successful. That was all I had to add.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah. And then the next slide. There we go. Okay, so accommodations overview. So in post-secondary education, accommodations are intended to reduce and or remove barriers to the academic experience. What we're not going to do is provide modifications to course content or requirements. So, when we get questions, and I'm sure Julia, you get these questions as well, and other people that are on here from faculty asking about like, well, how do I implement this accommodation? Like, do I have to change my content to make this more accessible? And the answer that I give to faculty is like, we're not expecting any like necessarily changes to be made to content. There should be no fundamental alterations to the course or materials. And that kind of gets me to my next point ahead of myself, but that it is just putting things in place, supports and tools like assistive technology, like providing note-taking. The U of I just switched over to Note-Taking Express, which is something that we're using for note-taking, and that is a tool. Sorry. And then and something else about accommodations and what they do are, we want to make sure that they're reasonable and appropriate. What we're not going to do is provide specialized instruction, and that's kind of where we're going to get into having accommodations, and then these offices and other student support services on campus, kind of utilizing both of those together is where we're really going to fill in some of those gaps for students who might need that extra layer of support through post-secondary education. And then what accommodations do as well as they depend on the class and the class requirements. What they do not do is apply to classes for all accommodations. So for example, as I'm meeting with students and going through their courses for the semester, we make sure that we really look at each course specifically. And so, if I see that they have a chem class and then they want to apply, say, for example, an extended time on tests accommodation, and then their next class is high noon yoga, I'm not going to apply a testing accommodation for high noon yoga because that's not applicable to that class, right? So making sure that we're looking really closely at the courses that they're in and really what is necessary for each course. And then the shift in accommodation expectations. So this is talking about a student that would be in a K through 12 setting. So a student may currently be receiving, so Kelsey has a designated peer she sits next to in math class. That peer takes notes for Kelsey and helps her with classwork when needed. So what something might look like that we would offer in post-secondary education would be, as I spoke about before, a note-taking tool or other types of assistive technology. We also give like approval to record sometimes for certain courses. And that, again, would be in conjunction with, maybe that note-taking and then also going to tutoring to really support the student. The second student that we're working with is Troy gets up to 1 week extensions on all assignments. And that's something that's really broad and not likely an accommodation that you would get in post-secondary education. So something that you would likely see would be access to readings and assignments in advance, or occasional extensions on assignments and deadlines for up to 48 hours. And those are also what I like to explain to students as high communication accommodation. So making sure that This is not just like a blanket accommodation of that there's an expectation that you can have 2 days for every assignment, but that you have to communicate specifically what assignments you're intending to use your extensions for, and being really specific about that with your instructors and communicative. The third scenario is Maria gets extra time on quizzes and exams, time unspecified. And so that will also be something that you would never see in post-secondary education. We're definitely going to specify the time, and that's going to be based on, you know, a really in-depth conversation that we have with students about their needs for testing and what their testing experience is like, and what they notice about themselves during testing, and kind of where they feel like they, you know, what kind of exams they're running out of time on. So then we decide based on that and documentation, you know, whether there's some like memory issues or things like that as well. So last little line here, accommodations reduce and remove barriers. They do not guarantee success.
All right. So more about the interactive process and documentation practices. I know a question came through in the chat about how much we rely on IEPs and current eligibilities from high school. So hopefully this helps answer that question a little bit more. We've said this phrase a couple times so far, the interactive process. The interactive process is what we use and what we operate on to determine student accommodations in post-secondary. It's very individualized, and we really focus on 3 sources of information. First, let me backtrack. A student, in order to get connected to our office, typically fills out a request for services. After that request for services, they meet with the disability services staff. When they meet with them, we really look at that student self-report. So we ask the student about their strengths, technology they use, tools they've learned. Then we also ask them about barriers and what they experience because of their disability. What are some effective accommodations or ineffective accommodations? So going back, if we have a copy of that student's IEP because they provided it to us, we'll look at those accommodations on the IEP and we'll talk about which ones apply and which ones don't apply. For the ones that could apply in college, we'll talk about, okay, how effective were these for you? Did you find yourself using this? And so on. So we really look at that student self-report. Is really important in the interactive process to be able to hear from the student about their experience. We also do our own kind of anecdotal information, observations, and interactions with the student. For example, I had a student I was talking with who has anxiety, and they were talking about how they feel anxious during class and what that anxiety looks like to them. And I noticed that during that conversation with the student, they had totally like crumpled up and ripped my business card I had given them. That observation showed me, yes, the student's telling me about their anxiety, the symptoms they experience, and I also physically saw that. And so we might use some of those observations, some of the language that the student uses, other strategies we see them utilizing. For example, if a student is using any sort of AAC device or text-to-speech device while we're talking, that sort of stuff, we look at those. Then the information from external sources, which is really just a fancy way of saying documentation. So the documentation may vary. For example, if a student's disability is more related to mental health, we might look at documentation from a provider, from a counselor they're currently seeing, because although students can have 504s and IEP from high school due to mental health, it's not as common. We typically get that documentation from a counselor. But so we really look at documentation from healthcare providers, school psychologists, IEPs, 504s, and other documentation such as that. So when we have IEPs, when we have 3-year eligibilities especially, that has some of that diagnostic information from academic achievement tests, maybe you know, some social scales and whatnot, that is really helpful. As far as, I saw a question come in through the chat, how current do you want psychoed reports to be? It varies. If it's reflective of the student's current needs, then a lot of the time that'll be okay. It really just depends on the individual student. For example, I had an IEP that I accepted and it was from like the 80s. But it talked about the student's learning disability. It talked about the impact in reading. And when I met with the student, they were telling me, I use ebooks, I use text to speech, I use all these things in my job. And so I accepted that IEP. Erin, would you add anything to that as far as?
Yeah, I was
Right.
trying to type in the chat that, but I was like, this would just be better if we could speak to this a little bit. It depends on the qualifying disability, in my opinion. And so something like a learning disability in reading or writing or dyslexia, I will likely accept something from, I've accepted something from elementary school because that is likely something that is going to impact them throughout their life. I'm trying to think of an example that I would have a hard time accepting one that was from elementary school, but probably like the mental health related ones would be more difficult to accept, like something where a student maybe had anxiety and like they had a 504 IEP in second grade or, you know, in elementary school, that those are going to change over time. And so I think we want that updated documentation and kind of like what other services they have gotten in, you know, that time frame. So I hope that was kind of a okay example.
No, that's a good point, especially like, let's say a student had a 504 in middle school or even freshman year of high school because they had a concussion and they were experiencing impacts of that concussion. We would most likely want to see now as a college freshman, college sophomore, if they're giving us that documentation from the initial concussion, we'd want to see documentation of, okay, how was that initial concussion? How is that still impacting them now? Because that can vary so much.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that literally happened to me this week. So I don't know why I didn't think of that.
One of the pieces of feedback we got from one of our presentations last month was what these accommodation letters look like. By no means is this what every single accommodation letter from every university looks like. This is just the example letter I use in my trainings with faculty of what ours might look like. So you can see that this is a lot shorter than like a 15 or 20 page IEP. This is 2 pages, email to students or to faculty, excuse me. A copy is always sent to the student when we send it out, but it lists typically the student's name, who their coordinator is, so who their contact point is at the Disability Resource Center. It'll list their accommodations and any specific information to know about those accommodations. For example, we have specific places where students take tests if they have testing accommodations, and so we put that information on the letter. You'll see that there's other accommodations listed: ability to leave class, access to assignments in advance, and so on. So if there's any additional information or resources that we think are tied to that accommodation or the implement of that accommodation, they may be included on the letter. Again, this is not what all letters look like. This is just an example of one of ours. And you'll see sometimes too, there is an explanation about the accommodation. So I know Erin, as an accommodation example, had mentioned occasional extension on assignment deadlines. You'll see that we do put some guidelines around that, how it's to be used infrequently, how the student needs to contact the professor. They don't need to disclose anything about their disability, but they need to tell the professor that this is an accommodated related reason. And we also talk about how it doesn't apply to all assignments. For example, this accommodation wouldn't apply to a group assignment because it impacts their classmates, and so on. So we do have different guidelines under each accommodation. They may look different dependent on the university, but typically, I mean, Erin, I know this looks pretty similar to what you guys say too on yours, because I've seen one of your letters. So
Yes. Yeah.
all right, I'll hand it over to Jamie.
Okay, so now we're going to move into some common offices, resources that we have on mostly they're on most college campuses, as well as disability specific programs. So the next slide will talk about Boise State University specifically. So for example, if a student has maybe math instruction or a writing instruction on an IEP, they're not likely to receive that exact accommodation in college. So there are resources and supports on college campuses to help with that. And they're all free, except for on our campus, we have the academic success courses. But for the most part, there will be support and that the students will not be left in the dust. And all colleges have some sort of academic support services. The extent just varies depending on the school and the size and the programs that they offer. So for Boise State, we do have the Writing Center. I've actually utilized the Writing Center quite often. It's very helpful. But they can help with lab reports, presentations, essays, anything that involves writing. They are really good at just peer reviewing it and then going over it with you so you can edit it yourself. There's also the Math Learning Center, drop-in tutoring for us, it's the most common 100, 200, and 300 level math courses, but that's going to vary depending on school, the different schools. And then we have the Advising and Academic Support Center, which has a lot. And so just some examples. They have various resources, videos, workshops. Like I said, the academic success courses. We have online tutoring and tutoring vouchers that students can receive. They may receive up to 6 hours of tutoring per course per semester. So that's a good amount of time of tutoring. There's also peer academic consultants that we have on campus that support students in various academic skill development strategies. So time management, study skills, note-taking, organizing, honestly, any skill development that they need. These peer academic consultants can help with that. And then of course, we also have counseling on campus and at the University Health Services. So any therapy counseling that a student needs, that is where they can go to receive those services.
Yes, and I think Jamie said this. I just want to reiterate too that they're not things that during the interactive process when we're determining accommodations with students, they're not things that we would ever put on the accommodation letter. Everything that we're about to share with you of the what else might there be are things that we might refer students to, let them know they're available. But it's their decision if they would like to access them. It's not anything that's part of their accommodation. And then another example of another Idaho school, College of Southern Idaho. And I might let the CSI expert himself talk about CSI if he wants to.
Yes, I would love to do that. So get my camera back on. There we go. We do have the Learning and Tutoring Commons on our campus, and they provide peer tutoring for students and a multiple number of subjects. They also have a specific writing lab in that area. We also have a math lab that's actually staffed by a professional tutor that students have access to. And we do also offer online tutoring. We're part of a consortium with different schools around the country that offer online tutoring for a bunch of topics as well. And that's really helpful for our distance learners and for our students that can't come in onto campus. We also have our counseling services that's free for students, and they assist students in a lot of different areas. And I don't know about U of I or BSU, but actually the number one disability that we work with in our office are mental health disabilities. We see that more than others. So this is definitely an area that, in addition to the accommodation, providing them with the mental health support too is important.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. I'll let Aaron.
Yes, so this is my slide, but we also have some people from Lewis and Clark State College if they would like to present on this. We can't hear you, Autumn, but I am pumped you turn your camera on. No. I'm gonna start and then you can jump in once we get the volume figured out. Okay, so Lewis and Clark State College, that's located in Lewiston and Clarkston area. They have a learning resource center in which it looks like they're providing career and technical education, or providing resources to career and technical education students, either in a program or on a course. And then their goal is to work on study time and making it more efficient and improve their success in college courses. They also have a writing center, which I'm assuming does very much like any standard writing center at a college. Tutoring services free to all students, which provides opportunity to discuss their writing with well-trained peer consultants in a comfortable collaborative space. And then their Student Success Center provides academic support with writing, math, science, and computer tutoring. The Student Success Center is centrally located in the library on their campus. And then here they'll find resources and services creating and supporting opportunities for learning. They also have a counseling center in which they offers various counseling services, and it also, which I thought this was really cool, offers a peer mentoring program where students can meet once a week, one-on-one with a peer to manage, to help with time management and staying organized each week. If anyone from Lewis and Clark State College wants to add to that, feel free. Autumn, I know you were having technical difficulties.
No, so the Student Success Center is relatively new. It was started in the fall. Like you said, it puts all of those tutoring centers right together. The nice thing is that's located, actually, two of those, the Writing Center and the Student Success Center, are both located in the library, which is the building that Accessibility Services is in. And so it's really easy for Autumn just to walk students over there to tell them what they have, what's available, introduce them to people. And so that helps with the comfort level. Student counseling is actually located in the building that I'm housed in. And so I periodically will work with students to show them where they need to go and introduce them around, which again, really helps. And then Learning Resource Center is more for our CTE kids. That's also in my building. And so we are strategically located around campus to kind of, show students where things are, introduce them, because really that tends to be the hardest part, is getting their foot in the door and finding out who they need to talk to. And so the benefits of being a small school is that we can walk those kids around and introduce them as they need to be, shown the ropes and who they need to talk to.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and at the University of Idaho, we have academic coaching, which I would say is probably one of the highest things that I recommend to students here at the U of I, because it's that one-on-one approach with students. They can have like weekly meetings, they can have bi-weekly meetings with an academic coach, and that works on building skills in areas where students are feeling like they need more skills, so such as organization, time management, note-taking strategies, test prep, test-taking strategies, etc. The academic coaches also offer an INTR class, which is our entry-level classes where they meet. It's like a 1 or 2, I think they changed it to a 1-credit class, but it kind of also gives them more exposure to those skills and being able to put them into practice and have access to those academic coaches regularly in their first or second semester of the U of I, or even I've seen sophomores and juniors take it too, to be honest. So I think academic coaching is a wonderful resource on our campus. The Writing Center is helps with all kinds of writing, from research papers, presentations, personal statements for applications. It is centrally located in our iSub, which is where Dean of Students, it's ton, our dining, Dean of Students, all of our student support services are within the one building, and it's a really welcoming space and seems like a really productive spot for students. I get a lot of good feedback about the Writing Center as well. SI Pass is peer-led study sessions for those classes where students seem to struggle the most. So we're talking like our math 143 class, which is like a college algebra class, biology, chemistry. So they take a peer who has been successful in the class before, and they have them leading these really structured study sessions, and they are kind of, they work, yeah, as a study session, but also like can be like tutoring, and it depends on how many people show up to the session. And so it could really work out for students who show up regularly. And sometimes it is given as extra credit for some courses if students attend SIPAS. I know that's like kind of rare, but and then also we have a Polia lab on campus, which is for our math, and students who I meet with don't always love the Polia lab because it is a big space with a lot of people, and it can be overwhelming to some. So the SIPAS can also be used for those Polia lab math classes where students just like don't thrive in those big environments to be able to complete their math work. Then we have our tutoring, which is drop-in or scheduled in the library. And I think that's it. I'm also missing our counseling and testing center, which I didn't put on there. And that is, they offer counseling and psychiatric services, psychological assessments, and emergency services as needed for students. And also the counseling and psychiatric services are free. The psychological assessments or any type of assessment is on like a sliding scale based on their financial aid. I think that's it.
Okay, so going into more or some other programs that Boise State offers, as well as U of I, more of our TRIO program. So students have to meet one of 3 qualifiers in order to be in a TRIO program. They either have to be a first-generation student, they either have to be low income, or they have to have a diagnosed disability. And so I am a part of TRIO ACES, so of course I'm going to be a hype man for that. But TRIO ACES is that academic coaching, meeting weekly, depending, some students are bi-weekly, but working on that skill development, working on whatever they would like support in. We offer workshops, social opportunities. We have bowling coming up on Monday, so just some social opportunities for them. Tutoring as well, which can be difficult at times trying to find tutors, but it is something that we offer and that we search for. And then other programming, we're always trying to work on mindfulness workshops. Doesn't always have to be skill development specifically, but just helping our students in any areas that they need support in. And TRIO ACES is the only TRIO program on campus whose staff is specifically trained in coaching students with disabilities. So that is kudos to us. But also it's just that one-on-one academic coaching. That is what TRIO ACES is for. However, if a student is a STEM major and looking for tutoring support or strategic advising, community resources, maybe TRIO STEM Scholars is more for them. It's only for STEM majors, kind of the same thing of the tutoring, one-on-one advising, academic skill development, career major exploration. They have got some good things as well. And then the TRIO teacher preparation. So that's only for education majors. Again, providing the academic advising, individualized tutoring, study and practice material for the Praxis exam. I always say it wrong. Financial literacy development, and also more social engagement opportunities. And the TRIO programs always come together. We actually have a giant TRIO gala this coming Saturday. So it's all the TRIO programs on campus coming together, just a social event for everyone to be a part of. And then we also have the TRIO Rising Scholars. So that's for all majors, tutoring, one-on-one advising, skill development training, pretty much the same thing as the other TRIO programs as well. But TRIO programs are great for, again, those students who have a diagnosed disability, first generation student, or low income. Just has to meet one of those 3.
And for our TRIO program at the University of Idaho, very similar to what Jamie is saying about what they do at Boise State. Some of the things to highlight is Some of the services, they offer some merit-based scholarships, individualized or small group tutoring. Something that I found really awesome when meeting with them recently is that they're offering 1 to 2 hours of tutoring per class per week for students who are part of their program, which seems like a sweet deal to me. Like that just, I think that's awesome. They also offer college success strategy courses for incoming freshmen. They do educational planning, academic goal setting, academic advising, learning strategies and study skills, some career exploration, financial aid and personal finance information. A big part of what those advisors do, I know, is advocacy and campus and community referrals. They also do some social and cultural events as well. All right. And then we're going to roll into some of our disability specific programs. And so at the U of I, we have the Raven Scholars, and that is a program that supports our students who are on the autism spectrum. They provide coordination of campus services, peer mentoring, social and life skills coaching, supported decision-making and strategies to improve academic, social, and life skills. So from the Cedar side of things, we work really closely with our Raven Scholars. They're part of our department. I know our associate director really, she values like that personal and institutional transformation, academic excellence, independence, diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. And she just started in the fall of this last year, 2022, running a tiered program. So how that works when she gets applicants for the Raven Scholars program, they start at a certain tier, which is a little more extensive. And so those are one-on-one meetings up to twice per week to meet with them to ensure that they, are organized, they're managing their time, they are getting everything they need, they're, being supported through all of their academic endeavors and social endeavors. And they also are required to enroll in her INTR class, which focuses on all those things as well. There's a tier 2, which is like once they graduate from that tier 1, or maybe they didn't need to enter at that tier either, that they meet 1 to 4 times monthly. They could be enrolled in the class. They still have, part of Ravens is they do a lot of social events and social groups. Like last week, we just had a stress ball fidget making games. I played Bananagrams for like 2 hours with our students, and it was really fun. And we just get to talk about intermixed. We get to talk about how school's going and how like dorm life is, and just how they like being at the U of I and things like that. So it's a really great program. It goes up to 3 tiers. Sorry, I got sidetracked. And tier 3 is sophomores or higher, and that's where they have really graduated from the tier 2. They no longer need that regular support. They might just be involved in those social groups or part of those special events, and might meet with one of the coordinators up there, or with Leslie, our associate director of that program, just to kind of touch base and if something was to come up in their semester. So very cool stuff with Ravens. Love them so much. I get to go up there once a week now, and I'm like, it's the highlight of my week. So next thing is Vandal Quest, which is quality university experience to support transition, and it's an inclusive post-secondary program designed to provide opportunities for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is our transition program that is partnered with pretty much with the local school district or anyone that's in the area who is going to a 18 to 21 program. They have it also is kind of tiered as well. They can do some dual enrollment if they had a certain GPA out of high school. And then they're mainly participants that are non-degree seeking students. They are participants that are non-degree seeking students who are interested in engaging in post-secondary education and improving skills like employment, community, and independent living. So all I got.
Thanks, Erin. And I have to apologize to Lewis Clark State College because I didn't know y'all had an inclusive program like Quest and Peers. I just put a link for it in the chat, the Spark program. It seems most similar to Vandal Quest. And I'll talk about the Peers program, but I just want to point out that programs like Spark, Vandal Quest, and the Peers program that are specifically and strategically designed for students with intellectual disability are not special to Idaho. So if you want a complete list across the country of participating schools that have inclusive programs for students with intellectual disability, I added a link in the chat. So at Boise State, we have a couple programs. Our Neurodivergent Scholar Society is very emerging this year. It is not as comprehensive as Raven Scholars, I will admit, but it really involves a coaching aspect and then a peer learning and peer social aspect. So students have to be registered with the EAC just because we need to verify that they have an autism diagnosis. And then they can engage in one-on-one coaching or mentoring, like with myself or Jamie. She does some coaching with our students in NSS. And then we also do skills mixers and social mixers. This month we did a skills mixer. And so one of our faculty members from conflict resolution came and did a workshop about communication and conflict resolution. And it was so good because we know that that's a point of stress for many of our students. And so it was really valuable. Some of our social mixers have been button making, crafts. Students want to do like a board game time. And so it's just a time for students to connect with others in their similar community. And so that's our Neurodivergent Scholar Society. And then we know, of course, like neurodivergent is not a synonym for autism, but so many of our students with autism have other disabilities and other identities. And so they thought neurodivergent was more inclusive to their whole identity when we were coming up with the name. And so our Peers program, that is our inclusive 2-year program for students with intellectual disabilities. Students work towards a certificate. And so they take classes that are specific to the Peers program, focused on kind of those academic support type classes, learning how to be a college student, those academic skills, and then as well as some job and career exploration readiness, participate in internships. And then they also take other Boise State courses as well, either for credit or audit, depending on the student's individual goals, individual skill levels, and so on. And so we have our first class of graduates. We have 3 graduates this year that will be walking at graduation this semester. So we're really excited for that. Okay, other community resources. I think this is my slide. Yes. Idaho Vocational Rehabilitation can really support students with disabilities on the career aspect and decision-making for qualifying students. They can also support in paying for course materials, tuition, and that sort of stuff for qualifying students and families. So I definitely recommend reaching out to them, especially for that career guidance. Idaho Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired supports students who are blind or visually impaired, similar to vocational rehabilitation. But what I really like is they also have specific skills training for students. For example, if a student is blind and they are coming from, I don't know, Texas, and they're coming to a new school, navigating that environment and different skills training that might go along with it, learning, you know, the community system, resources, city bus, that kind of stuff. The Idaho Commission can really help with finding resources for that skills training. And then the Idaho Assistive Technology Project, because we know that depending on the school, assistive technology does not always follow students when they graduate high school. So again, for speaking for students who are blind, you know, if they use a Braille reader in high school that they used in K-12, if the school provided it, it doesn't always follow them. And so Idaho Assistive Technology Project can support individuals with getting assistive technology. at very low cost, payment plans and that kind of stuff. We just had a student get hearing aids from them, and it was amazing. And they're brand new hearing aids, and they were at very low cost for one of our students. So those are other community resources that are available. And then we also have our last slide has where to get accommodations at Idaho schools. So these are the names and websites of all of our Idaho schools, and where students would get accommodations from those schools, so that we did the digging so you don't have to. But yeah, I want to be mindful of time. We have about 5 minutes. If anyone wants to unmute or ask any questions in the chat. Or if any of our Idaho school partners, if there was anything you wanted to add to any information we shared today.
I think I just want to pipe in and kind of let people know that, so while all of our offices do the same thing, we don't always do things the same way. And I think we have a small group of all of our offices that meet on a regular basis. And that's one of the things we talk about is continuity across the colleges. And obviously at LC, we're a smaller college, we have a little less money. And so we aren't able to offer like aids and that kind of thing. And we see that as students come in to the college level, that some colleges can provide that, some of us can't. And so that's something that when you're looking at what you need, what your students need to be successful, definitely have those conversations with us, because while our school may not be able to offer, having a sign language interpreter in the classroom with your students, we have a really good way to help get that information to them. And so that's just something to keep in mind as students are kind of looking at schools, finding what schools fit for them, and where they can be the most successful.
Thanks, Dawn. Anyone else? Any questions that popped up or questions that were not answered during the presentation? Yes, you should be able to share the link. The link is set so that anyone with the link can view it.
Could you go back one screen where you've done all the work for us and give me all?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Scott, Dan, anything you guys wanted to touch on?
I think you've done a great job today. I really appreciate you doing this and inviting us to be part of it. And if anyone has specific questions about CSI, please feel free to reach out to me.
Same, I'll throw my info in the chat. I imagine Scott will do the same, but I was curious though, who else was in on this? Who was represented by those that were participating? Are you educators? Are you parents? Who do we have? Maybe throw it in the chat or something. But I was curious who else was here, but thank you for having us as well.
Yeah, great question, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, if you're comfortable, we'd love for you to share if you're a teacher, parent, psych. Awesome. Mountain Home, thank you. Catherine, I'm not sure if you know Kaylee Quinn out in Bruno. Very dear friend. She's great. Bliss School District, awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to share that we will be meeting again back to our regularly Tuesday schedule, regularly scheduled Tuesdays. So March 21st will be our next one, a little bit later in the evening. So we'll be sending calendar invites for that. But thank you so much for joining and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.